And for those that mostly do know a little bit about it or some about it, are thinking about it strictly from a sexual perspective. But today we are joined by Davy Ward Erickson, and she is the founder of the Institute of Authentic Tantra Education, the only government accredited Tantra center in the entire world. And today we are actually going to talk about how Tantra can benefit your pelvic floor. Thank you for joining us today, Davy.
Yay, thank you so much for having me, Heather. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so why don't we start off with the basics first? Let's describe Tantra to our audience.
Yes, well, Tantra is a spiritual science that was cultivated in northern India as far back as 10,000 years ago. So Tantra has had many different iterations since its inception. What we currently understand as Tantra in the modern world is actually a fusion of these ancient teachings from 10,000 years ago and Vedic teachings that are about 5,000 years old. And those were woven together to create the different branches of Tantra that are mostly practiced in India. But our lineage of Tantra, I'm trained in Tibetan Buddhist Tantra, and that lineage began about 2,600 years ago. And with the Buddha, Shakyamuni. And eventually the tantric teachings from India were taken to Tibet and institutionalized into Tibet. And that is how we now have Tibetan tantric Buddhism, which is what I practice. But there are a variety of different lineages in Tantra, traditions, styles, methods, practices. So in the world of Tantra, it's really, really important to know what tradition the teachings are coming from and what lineage those teachings are coming from as well. Because not all Tantra is compatible. Some of the practices are actually contraindicated. So knowing the tradition and knowing the lineage is really important in the world of Tantra. Uh-oh, did we freeze? Hello? Uh-oh. So a few other things about Tantra that are important is that what most Westerners are accustomed to is something that we refer to as Neo-tantra. So Neo-tantra began as a result of the colonization of India in the mid to late 1800s, early 1900s. And so a lot of Neo-tantra are methods and philosophy that were appropriated from the Indian culture during that time period and brought to the West as part of the colonization of India. So what we have now in North America is something that we refer to as Neo-tantra. And again, through the centuries, Neo-tantra has gone through several different iterations. There was a big influx and a wave in the 80s and 90s with Osho, Rajneesh. So a lot of what we see in the world, in North America, in the world of Western Tantra, is rooted in Osho's teachings, as well as a combination of some of the methods and philosophy that came over in the early part of the 20th century. So not all Tantra is the same. That's something that I love to let people know, that not all Tantra is the same. And that's why, for me, it's very important that your instructor, when you're learning about Tantra, that you have a clear understanding of the tantric tradition that the methods are stemming from, and the lineage of Tantra that the methods are being presented through. And as I said, that's because not all methods, not all lineages are actually compatible. Some of them are actually contraindicated. So that's a little bit about the origins of Tantra, what it is. It's a spiritual science. And depending on where, which tradition and which lineage, that's also going to determine your orientation to your practice. So yeah, most people in North America think that Tantra is a sexual practice. Most people in North America our views of tantra have been filtered through the lens of neo-tantra. And so when you use the word tantra, a lot of people think that it's crazy sex positions, or they think of sting and like making love for hours, and there's a lot of misconceptions around what tantra actually is. And again, if you view tantra as like a sensual massage or some kind of erotic thing, primarily what you're thinking of is neo-tantra. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just being mindful that neo-tantra is the Western adaptation of tantra. It is not actually authentic tantra. And then I see a question coming in about what does contraindicated mean. Contraindicated means not compatible. It's a medical term, meaning that that some medicines may either cancel each other out, or if you take both of those medicines at the same time, you may actually cause damage to yourself. So contraindicated means not to use in conjunction. And so how that applies to tantra specifically is that authentic lineage-based tantra works with not just the physical body, but the energy body. And when we're working with the energy body, it's really important to really adhere to one specific pathway or tradition or method so that you don't cause confusion. If you cause confusion and distortion in your energy body, that can lead to illness or emotional imbalance. And so when we say some methods are contraindicated, it means that they shouldn't be used together, that they may actually cause confusion or an imbalance in your energy body and your experience. So that's what contraindicated means. And so going on with some more questions here, is sexuality a part of traditional tantra? So that's a really great question because that's very controversial. And the simplest answer for that is it really depends on the tradition and the lineage that you're practicing. Some traditional lineages of tantra do not have any sexual teachings. Some traditional lineages do have sexual teaching. So in our tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we do have sexual instruction and sexual teachings that are part of the foundation. And in fact, Tantra was actually established, Tibetan Tantric Buddhism was actually established in Tibet through sexual yoga, through sexual union practices with Padmasambhava and Yeshe Tsogyal. So our particular tradition of Tantra has had sexuality woven into it at the root. Yeah.
Okay. I had to move location, so I apologize. Gotta love Maine and the internet. It's a little spotty, but so I kind of lost a little bit where we left off, but with what do most people in North America think that Tantra is?
Yes, so I refer to that as most people think it's neo-tantra. So a lot of people in North America think that tantra is, crazy sex practices or different positions or massage or, it's really like the shadow realm kind of thing is what comes to mind. And part of that is because of the distortions that have occurred and the lack of education about what real tantra actually is. So again, when we're talking in Western society in North America, most people are familiar with something that we refer to as neo-tantra. Which can be very supportive and very healing for people. But again, it's important to understand that Neo-Tantra is kind of a mishmash of different tantric concepts and philosophies.
Okay, so we define it that way, sexuality as a part of traditional tantra. Is it a part?
It depends on the tradition. So it really depends on the tradition and the lineage. There are many, so it's very controversial. I get a lot of flack from people online, particularly men, that are like, tantra doesn't have anything to do with sex. It really depends on your lineage and your tradition. Our lineage has had sexuality embedded into it at the root. In fact, as I was saying, Tantric Buddhism was established in Tibet through sexual union practices of Padmasambhava and Yeshe Tsogyal, for those who want to Google those names. So our lineage does have sexual practices, and our lineage was actually founded by two women, which I think is very interesting because a lot of the Tantric traditions are very patriarchal, and the more patriarchal the tradition is, the more aversion it has to sexuality. The matriarchal lineages of Tantra tend to include and incorporate sexuality into our spiritual practice because our sexuality is part of our humanity. And our spiritual practice is about learning how to be a more healthy human, right? So why would we leave sex out? It's part of our humanity.
It's part of our humanity. It's part of our health.
Yep.
It's a part of everything.
Yep.
Can you share a bit about your own personal tantric healing journey?
Yeah. So I came to Tantra in a very unique way in comparison to, I think, how a lot of people have heard about it. So I was a monk of the Ashaya order for 10 years. I had, at the age of 24, I went through a period of fasting and silence. I took vows. I dedicated my life to spiritual realization. I lived in North Carolina in an ashram for years. And I wore only white for almost a decade. I took these, these vows, and that part of it was wearing only white. And so fast forward about 10 years later, and I was living on Kauai, and I was still very dedicated to my spiritual path. I had a little, my own little small business at the time. And then I would meditate. That's what I did. I would go home from work and I would meditate all day. And so when I encountered Tantra from a Tibetan healer. He wasn't Tibetan. He was a Westerner, but he practiced Tibetan medicine. And that's how I encountered him. He was helping me with some health issues. And he was listening to me talk about my path as a monk and my spiritual realization. And he was like, I really think that Tibetan Buddhist Tantra is like the next step in your path of evolution. And so I was introduced to Tantra as a way of harnessing sexual energy and using it specifically for healing and the transformation of consciousness and ultimately realizing enlightenment. So I didn't learn Tantra as like a sex technique or like, how to have better sex. I learned Tantra specifically as a spiritual pathway for realizing enlightenment. So that's how it was introduced to me. And I was trained in Tantra, again, not in a class or a workshop, but under this umbrella with the permission and the guidance of my Tibetan Buddhist Lama, Lama Tashi Dundrup, and my mentor, who actually petitioned our Lama for permission to train me. And so I was trained in Tantra as a healing modality. My mentor was a healer. He was a Tibetan doctor. And so for me, Tibetan Buddhist Tantra and Tibetan medicine have been inextricably interwoven. So my whole understanding of Tantra is as a path of healing and personal and spiritual realization. That is the way it was disseminated to me, shall we say.
Okay. One of the things I'm going to add a thought in here is as we speak, and I think it's going to speak to a lot of our audience here, is we're talking about spirituality, and when we talk about Buddhism, we talk about other things like that. Then we get into the field of religion. So how can we? For someone who is maybe has different religious preferences, different thoughts, how can we, I guess the best way is to help them understand the difference between spirituality and religion.
Yeah. And that's such a deep and juicy question. So in relationship to Tantra is not religion, it is a practice. It's more closely akin to yoga. In fact, in our tradition, Tantra is considered to be the highest form of yoga. And so spirituality is for me, and I think we all, have our own unique relationship to what spirituality means to me, but to each of us. But spirituality to me means, how do I connect with my divine essence as a human being? How do I connect with myself, my body, my environment? How do I connect with other human beings? It's having access to that intangible, kind of like that sixth sense, that aspect to us that animates life. Religion to me is dogma. It's a set of beliefs and structures that one chooses or doesn't choose to adhere to. So Tantra, even though it's a spiritual practice, it can fall under the category of religion for those who choose to practice it that way. The way my Lama instructed me, even though he's a Buddhist, he refers to Tantra as a practice. He says we practice Tantra. We don't think Tantra. We don't, worship Tantra. Tantra is something that we do. It's a method and a series of practices. And for me, because Tantra is a spiritual discipline, it's very important to let all of you know where these methods and teachings come from. It's a way of honoring and being in integrity with the tradition that I teach within.
Okay. And I know that your practice was initially founded with a pelvic floor physical therapist. And as we kind of go down this journey of Tantra, how does it support sexual healing?
Yeah, so that's also a really great question. So kind of circling back to what I was sharing about my journey into Tantra, what I was not expecting was the sexual healing part, because I thought my sex was fine. I didn't have orgasms. I didn't know where my G spot was. I could maybe have a clitoral orgasm with a vibrator, but that was normal. Like, I didn't know, you didn't know, you don't know what you don't know. And vaginal pain, having pain during penetration, I just thought that was part of the equation. It's supposed to hurt, right? So a lot of things that I know are now actually, I refer to now as actual dysfunctions or issues. At the time, I had just accepted as normal because I didn't have any other education. And so for me, the Tantra was using a combination of energy body yoga or energy body medicine, which I can explain a little bit more about as we go, and these very body-based somatic hands-on sexual healing methods. And it's really the combination of both the understanding of how our energy body works, because our energy body and physical body are two sides of the same coin. So when we're talking about healing from a holistic perspective, it's not just what's happening physically, it's what's happening mentally, emotionally, energetically, and spiritually as well. Mm-hmm. So from a holistic healing standpoint, understanding the energy body is important, but understanding how the autonomic nervous system and the soma works is also critically important. So a lot of what I refer to as yogas, and yoga means method or tool, a lot of the actual physical yogas of Tantra are all about helping the nervous system relax. Mm-hmm. And reach this beautiful, relaxed balance, which facilitates healing and the release of trauma. And in my research over the last 15 years, what I've discovered both in practice and, from academic study, is that a lot of the common sexual dysfunction issues that we have as women can usually be traced back to trauma, whether it's overt trauma from sexual abuse or what I like to call like atmospheric trauma from growing up in a sex negative society that teaches us that good girls don't enjoy sex. So the impact of that on our psychology and our soma is a lot. So it's important to take all of that into consideration when we're talking about healing and particularly healing from sexual pain. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it does. Not to mention childbirth.
Yeah, exactly. And gynecological exams. So there's a number of what we refer to, as common normalized gynecological exams that are actually traumatizing to the body, to the genitals, and to the nervous system, right? Yeah. So that's something I've uncovered in myself and many, many of my students. And I remember the first time that I heard about it was from trauma specialist Dr. Peter Levine, who actually was talking about the vagus nerve and the pelvic innervation of the vagus nerve, and how many women experience numbness or genital pain as a result of common gynecological procedures that we don't intellectually understand as traumatizing, but the body perceives as a trauma. That's the thing about trauma. The mind doesn't have to recognize it as a trauma for the nervous system to perceive it as a threat.
Yes. Yeah, like vaginismus,
Exactly.
Trauma, and you can't even put a tampon in your vagina. This is such a common occurrence, and I think women feel very alone when they get diagnosed with it because it's something hard to talk about, and let alone realize that there are so many other women struggling with this exact same issue. So.
And this was an issue that Tantra was particularly potent at addressing. So you mentioned my previous business partner, who's no longer with our organization. She's doing her own thing in Norway. But I initially founded the company in the United States with her. And her name is Marta, wonderful, wonderful, beautiful soul. And she specialized in somatic release of pelvic floor pain and dysfunction. And she trained with me and began weaving some of the Tantra Tantra that she had learned, the yogic breathing, the communication, the somatic sexual healing practices, she began using some of that in her clinical practice. And she, within a year, had all of the top pelvic physiotherapists referring clients to her because she got results that nobody else in the field could get, because she was weaving these breathing methods, these communication methods that all allowed the nervous system to relax. And her clients were having profound transformation, like to the point where they were able to have pain-free sex over a series of sessions. And what she found across the board, she said in 99.9% of the cases, and she had her hands on these people's bodies, she was working with them, and 99.9% of the cases, it was always a trauma. It was always rooted in either a psychological, emotional, or actual physical trauma, or a combination of all of those. That was the root cause of that constriction in the pelvic floor.
Yeah. And so what kind of tips would you give to our audience here in regards to how to help with healing vaginal and sexual pain?
Yeah. So first is talking about it, right? Like we're doing now. I think so much of the pain is exacerbated by the shame, the code of silence, right? So talking about it, getting empathy, maybe getting counseling to, just share, to process your emotions around it. Because the more intense our emotions are, the more that's going to cause dysregulation in the nervous system and constriction in the body. Then I highly encourage you to seek out either a practice or a practitioner of your own to start connecting with your body and your breath and learning how to regulate your own autonomic nervous system. So meditation practices, breathing practices, and I really encourage you to begin these outside of the sexual experience. Right? So building a foundation of presence and self-connection with your own body and your own breath that you then take into your sexual experience is fundamental. So those, just off the top of my head, I mean, there's so many layers to this. We have training programs, right? I don't want this to be too salesy, but we have training programs.
Let's talk about those. Let's talk about the courses that you offer for our audience.
Okay, awesome. So we have two courses that are really pertinent for addressing vaginal pain and unlocking pleasure, because that's the whole thing. What's on the other side of pain is pleasure. Pain is usually, we understand it is a trauma response, right? Or it's a defensive response in the body. So once we heal and resolve the root cause of that pain, what we have access to is pleasure. So we have two programs to help guide you through this process. We have a self-study program called the Female Orgasm Intensive, and this is the one that I designed with Marta. And she and I, I believe it's 6 modules, and each module is released every 2 weeks. So that's a very easy, slow-paced course, that's easy to digest. And it walks you through the foundational methods of this modality that we refer to as authentic Tantra. So it introduces you to the energy body medicine of Tibetan 5-element Tantra, which works on healing and clearing your sexual reproductive system on the energetic level. Then we introduce you to yogic breathing techniques, specifically the ocean breath, which is designed to activate the ventral vagal pathway and relax the autonomic nervous system so that you can achieve a nice, again, relaxed balance for arousal. It also helps facilitate the release of trauma when it arises to be purified, as we say. And then we also share with you our trademarked and copyrighted hands-on sexual healing methods that you can use with yourself and or a partner. So the Female Orgasm Intensive, again, it's a self-study program, all online. It's videos that you can watch. I think it takes about 3 to 4 months to complete all of the videos. But again, it's a holistic sexual healing program. And that's very easily accessible. I think the membership is either $30 a month or maybe $2.99 or $3.99 for the year. So it's very accessible and very affordable. The other program that we have for those who really who really resonate with this style of Tantra that I'm sharing with you and really want to dive deeply into their healing and become their own medicine carriers, so to speak, their own holistic healers or tantric healers. Our Tantra healing, our Tantra Mastery for Personal Healing program is a 13-session one-on-one personal coaching program. So this is where you would work with one of my hand-picked trained faculty members to walk you through this process of integrating the 4 pillars of healing with this modality. So you would be working with these Tibetan 5-element healing meditations, which are 17,000 years old. You want to talk about some, some validity there, 17,000 years old, and they're still working today. We work with meditation. We work with movement practices, so pelvic floor exercises, physical movements to help open the body and increase more pleasure and joy. We work with actual pleasure practices, not just sexual pleasure, but pleasure as we experience the totality of pleasure as human beings. So we talk about 4 forms of pleasure: sexual, sensual, emotional, and spiritual pleasure. So really opening up our pleasure pathways, so to speak. And then we focus on connection. Again, connection to self, connection to our most intimate partners, connection to our environment. So the Tantra Mastery for Personal Healing program, again, it's a one-on-one coaching program. It takes place over 4.5 months. It's a deep dive. And for those of you that really want to commit to transforming your life, quite frankly, through Tantra, this is a wonderful offering for you. And that's a higher up on the price point. That's a $4,000 program. Actually, it's a $5,000 program, but we've got a special between now and July 1st for $1,000 savings. So, yeah.
Okay, that's the ultimate mastery.
Yes, that's the ultimate mastery.
Ultimate mastery. Yeah, and I think you mentioned, the pelvic floor aspect, and I know that's where we get into like our pelvic floor physical therapy, the easy magic wands. I think the Glide just popped up here recently, and so that is our isoosmolar pH balanced lubricant that is used in combination with that, just to kind of go over some of those pop-ups. And I know you use kind of both of those things in part of that.
We do. We actually, that wand is actually our recommended tool for somatic sexual healing, for doing your own solo somatic sexual healing. So we combine the work with the wand with pleasure. So that's the big piece, with a lot of the pelvic floor. I hear from my students and clients and out in the world, pelvic floor therapies. I'm like, well, where's the pleasure? Pleasure is literally medicine. Pleasure helps relax the nervous system. It helps the body open. It helps the body expand. You can use pleasure. There's a practice we use called translating pleasure, where you use pleasure from one area of the genitals, and then you massage another area that's either numb or painful, and the pleasure literally translates from one area to the other area. So we use that wand for doing that translating process, translating pleasure, as well as opening up deeper areas of the yoni, of the vagina, of the anus. So combining that pelvic therapy wand with some of the tantric healing methods that we use that's your secret sauce.
I love that. That's wonderful, because, so many times we hear these experiences. So many patients are so scared to go to pelvic floor physical therapy. They're afraid of being in more pain. They're not sure what to expect. All of these. So by combining pelvic floor physical therapy with pleasure, creates a whole new level of comfort and experience that you may not be getting necessarily at your pelvic floor physical therapist. So that's an alternative if you don't feel comfortable.
And it was amazing. This is what the work that Marta did, because she obviously couldn't use the pleasure in her clinical work, but what she would do is she would invite the partners of many of her women to come in, and she would teach them some tantric breathing. She would teach them ocean breath, the specific method. And then when the female partner was on the table, Marta would communicate with her about ocean breathing. She'd use tantric communication to communicate about boundaries and these subtle nuances, and really like not penetrating the body before it was ready, which is a huge thing. And then what Marta would do is she would talk to both of the partners about how they could enhance this experience by using pleasure. And so she would teach the partner how to do the breathing and the communication and do the pelvic floor therapy, and then just give an oral, kind of communication about, and then to really take it up a notch, stroke her clitoris or another area of the vulva that feels pleasurable, and combine pleasure with this pelvic floor therapy. So she would actually train the couples in her office practice how to use the pleasure for healing so that they could become their own healers, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. Like you can't get the pleasure in the pelvic floor office because they'll get arrested. But if your pelvic floor therapist understands that pleasure is healing, they can kind of coach you through how to combine that for yourself at home.
So if any pelvic PTs are watching, is the Tantra Mastery Program a really good program for them to help incorporate into their practice?
Yes, and I would actually highly encourage you to actually get certified in authentic Tantra. So not only are we the only government accredited school for tantric sexual healing in the world, our certification program has been approved by the Ministry of Education as a credible vocational training program. And also, as of 2 months ago, our certification program makes you eligible for a master's or a PhD in authentic Tantra from Ubiquity University. So we've actually partnered with a university in Europe that you can use your credits from our training program to receive a master's or a PhD. So if pelvic floor therapists, I highly recommend that you go all the way. Again, of course, you can start with the personal healing and get a taste of it and see if you resonate. But if you align with this and this feels appropriate, I highly encourage you to go all the way and go ahead and get a master's degree in Tantra and begin weaving that into your work.
That's wonderful. I have to tell you a little bit of my journey that led me to you is that I was teaching a pelvic and sexual health course in Turkey this past November 2022. And these were all pelvic PTs, clinicians. And it was really interesting because they had so many questions about Tantra, and I only had so much from my own personal experience, my own personal relationship to be able to, be able to speak to them. I was there with another pelvic PT, Dee Hartman, and we did this like pub talk, and we're surrounded by all of these therapists that also brought a lot of their significant others with them. And in a place that's not very sexually open, asking these sexual health questions, it was eye-opening, but they had so many questions about Tantra. And I remember I actually forced my husband to get up in front of the crowd and kind of describe the connection, the piece, the breathing together, and my husband turned beet red, but it really led me to this journey of wanting to be able to answer more of those questions, to be able to, so even me myself, I want to take your course because I only know so much, and I would love to be able to answer more and more of those questions that we get as we do more and more coursework in education. So.
Yeah. And my understanding, that connection that you're describing is key. We know as human beings that our brains are literally wired for connection. And the way that we're raised in Western society, there's a connection deficiency. So again, I call them yogic, the yogic methods of Tantra, of coming together, being face to face, looking into each other's eyes, that signals your ventral vagal pathway that it's safe to connect. Well, when our ventral vagal pathway, which is part of our autonomic nervous system, feels it's safe to connect, it relaxes. And we get to sink more and more into our heart and this openness and this joy and this pleasure. And then the breathing literally synchronizes our nervous systems. When it's been clinically shown, and you may know this, that when 2 or more people breathe together at the same rate and the same pace, our heartbeats literally synchronize. So imagine, you and your husband are sitting there, you're sharing your breath, you're looking into each other's eyes, you're signaling to your nervous systems that it's safe and awesome, but then your heartbeats are actually syncing up. And your brainwave patterns, they found that your brainwave patterns when you're harmonizing your breath also sync up. So you're synced up here in your mind, you're synced up in your heart, and then you're going to sync up your genitals. Do you think you'd have a different experience than just going for it? A lot of people just try to sync the genitals and then get the heart and the brain later. But with Tantra, we're starting with the heart. We're starting with emotional connection. And then we go into, the energetic or the intellectual connection or the brainwave connection. And then once connection's already established, then we move into union.
And we can experience this same type of connection with ourselves as well, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So for me, connection begins with ourselves. right? We can only connect as deeply with another as we can connect with ourselves. So, for instance, my Tantra training, yes, I trained with my mentor, but before I even got together with my mentor, he gave me, a series of things to do and some meditations and some visualizations and some sexual solo pleasure techniques, solo pleasure practices. So I learned to build and work with my own sexual energy on my own before I used it, before I wove it in with a partner, before I practiced with a partner. So I highly recommend, like, we are our own best sexual healers. We are our own best lovers. Truly, we have that potential. And so starting here and then sharing that with your partner is just so enriching.
Wonderful. Yeah, I just attended a talk called "Raising Sexually Healthy Children," because it's the other question I get a lot, and you never know how to speak to parents. So I did this course, and it was brilliant. Jennifer Weisner was her name. She's a sex therapist, and it was really interesting about learning to connect with yourself at a very young and early age, because they're not seeing it as sexual.
Yep.
They're seeing it as pleasure, about
Yep.
feeling good, and about exploring their own bodies and understanding their own bodies, and to see it from a completely different perspective than how an adult sees
Yes.
masturbation and other things like that, and how it's experiential learning, just like we guide our children. So it was just really brilliant, and I think that if we did that more often, imagine how much more empowered, to explore yourself and create those connections with yourself, with others, that you would be able to do, if because so many of us get to an older age and go, oh, this is how I orgasm, oh, this is how we don't explore our pleasure until we realize that we're missing it, and
Exactly.
some people never realize that they're missing it. And that's why I think Tantra is so wonderful. It's an incorporation of so much that we're missing with the connections with ourselves, that then allow us to connect with others. So
Absolutely. And one of the things I say often is that sexual shame is learned behavior. We're
yeah,
not born with sexual shame. We learn as children. So those of us who have, I don't have children, but I've worked with children before, and I hear this from many of my students. And, for those of us who have children, children at a certain age, when they're toddlers, walk around touching their genitals all day. Right. You basically have to tell them to stop touching their genitals, because they always want to touch their genitals because it feels good. Why wouldn't you want to do that? It's like touching your toe, right? There's no shame. So how the adults in the environment respond to children touching their genitals is going to inform their relationship to their sexuality later as adults. I cannot tell you how many clients I've had, who part of their sexual pain and their vaginal pain and their sexual trauma was being told as toddlers that they were nasty, dirty little girls for touching their genitals, or
yeah,
that they were conditioned either by a parent or a teacher or a family member that good girls don't do that, and receive the message with either verbal violence, emotional violence, or in some cases physical violence. And then they're 24 to 35 or 44 years later, and now they're in our office needing to unwind that, needing to release that somatically from their bodies, because it's preventing them from accessing their pleasure. So how children learn from the adults in their environment. And
mhm.
we learned from the adults in our environment how to relate to sexuality, what was acceptable and what was unacceptable. And for many of us, we learned that, pleasure was not acceptable. And that informs us later on in life. So that's a really, really critical component. And when people ask me, how do you address sexuality with children? I say, heal your own relationship to your sexuality, and your children will follow your example. Yeah.
All right, well, let's jump into some wonderful questions here. Looks like
Yeah.
we've got quite a few. Here's our.
Yeah.
What is dyspareunia?
Yeah. So dyspareunia. Remind me if I'm I'm going to look this up real quick so that I am talking about the same thing. So it's defined as persistent or recurring genital pain that occurs just before, during, or after sex. Where pain is located can be an indication of where the treatment is needed. So what causes it? Well, science doesn't know, right?
We're a little behind on the women's healthcare front.
Yeah, and what I've seen is that it's really person specific, and so there's not one broad answer overall. What I will share for you in Tibetan medicine and the Tibetan tantric tradition, we understand that there's 8 primary causes of illness. So if I have a student or client coming to me and they have dyspareunia, we do an in-depth intake. So I'm listening for one or more of these 8 primary causes of illness. And so those 8 primary causes of illness are unprocessed anger, unprocessed attachment, pride, jealousy, or ignorance. And all of those unprocessed emotions collect in the body and are stored there and, arise as blocks or pains or numbness, later on in life. So those 5 root poisons, as we call them, as well as in the Tibetan tradition, something called the practice of wrong religion, negative energy, so defined as curses, or spiritual energy, spiritual imbalances, right? So one of those 8 primary causes must be in place in order for any illness or dysfunction to flourish. That being said, there's also environmental factors. There could be toxins. There could be irritants. Like I will say, for instance, I used to use a lot of coconut oil in my sex and my pleasure. About 3 years ago, coconut oil started causing me irritation and vaginal pain. Right. And so I got rid of the coconut oil and I started using a different lube. Pain cleared up. Right. So there could be environmental factors. There could be infections that we're unaware of. There could be fungus or pathogens. So it really depends. There's a variety of different reasons that this experience may be arising. Some of the ways that if you're able to identify that it's not a physiological issue or a physiological cause like an infection or a pathogen, that it's psychosomatic, then Tantra can be really supportive using the breath work, particularly using the hands-on somatic sexual healing methods, as well as working with the energy body to clear and purify any of those root causes. That's the benefit of the energy body work in Tantra, is that those 8 causes I mentioned, the 5 root poisons and, wrong religion, all of those can be purified and cleared by using like the 5-element meditation practices over a period of time. So it's kind of like, I like to think of it as hitting the issue from a variety of different angles, addressing it holistically, physically, mentally, emotionally, and energetically.
Perfect. Let's, here we go. So the Queen Energy was asking, how can we overcome this numbness?
Yeah. So with one tip, so there is not one tip. It depends on it depends on the root cause of the numbness, right? So something that we teach in relationship to trauma is that there's 4 stages of healing when the root causes trauma. The first way trauma presents is as numbness or lack of sensation. The other way, as the trauma begins to heal, it presents as pain. Pain then moves to irritation or discomfort, and then it moves into function or pleasure. And this follows the pattern of the way the nervous system stores trauma as well. So really deep trauma is going to be stored as a freeze, as an immobilization response. And as you start to thaw and come out of that freeze response, you move into fight or flight. Well, that's where the pain and the irritation come in. And then, once the pain and the irritation have been moved through and processed, then you're back to a regulated nervous system. And that translates sexually as pleasure. Right. Yeah. So how to address this really depends on the root cause of the numbness. If it is a trauma response, then you want to address it by self-connection, mindfulness, and somatic sexual healing methods are what I usually recommend.
Perfect. What's our next one here? How can we use Tantra as we enter menopausal age? My husband is more traditional.
Yeah. So by traditional, I'm going to presume that to mean adverse to Tantra or not.
What do we call that? Vanilla.
I'm vanilla too. I'm a vanilla tantrika. There's many different things. So for you, things that you can do for yourself is if you're having, perimenopause or menopausal symptoms, which can include vaginal dryness, low libido, pelvic floor, issues, incontinence, that sort of thing. Tantra can be very supportive with the movement practices. So we recommend doing jade egg exercises, pelvic floor exercises. We combine them with pelvic movement. So we're not just working on, we're not just trying to contract and release the pelvic floor. We're actually working with the entire pelvic floor, the entire pelvis, the waist, the hips, all of it to build tonacity and strength. So that can be very, very supportive. Also, really connecting. I found this very, very crucial for me as I have dealt with menopausal, perimenopausal symptoms, is really connecting to the root of desire. Meaning, why do I want to make love or why do I not want to make love? Because before, perimenopause, my sexual desire was very informed by my loins. I call it like the fire in my loins. And it was like a hunger, right?
Yeah.
And as I've moved through closer to menopause or through perimenopausal, that's really shifted. And now my orientation to making love is really more heart-based. The genitals are there, but that's not the primary urge. It's more about meeting needs for connection and sharing and union, quite frankly. And so along with doing the physical yogas of Tantra, I really encourage you to do some self-reflection and some self-connection and some self-discovery around what motivates you to move towards sex and what may be preventing you from wanting that. And I'm wondering, about your husband. Is he meeting your needs for connection? Because connection should be a precursor to sex. A lot of people, the way we're taught in the West is sex means penis and vagina. That's your typical heterosexual whatever. But sex is actually the physical expression of a union, an emotional union that we feel in our hearts. So I really encourage couples who are struggling with libido to focus on connection and sensual intimacy, and then the sex can blossom from there.
And also, we don't necessarily in Tantra, need to get to the point of penetration. If
Absolutely not.
penetration isn't possible because of a painful condition, you don't have to get to the point of penetration to experience pleasure, correct?
Absolutely. And in fact, there's a really beautiful exercise that I developed called the Conscious Sensual Awareness Partner Exercise, which is about using our five senses and our sensuality and our words to create this beautiful, like, sacred container where we are appreciating and celebrating the physical beauty, the smells, the taste, the sounds, the touch, the sensual connection with our partner. And there's no sex, there's no genital pleasure, unless of course you want to take it there. But the exercise itself is just about stroking and communicating and eye gazing and breathing and connecting in a sensual and intimately sensual way without the pressure of sexual, intercourse having to be on the table.
Kind of what I did in a crowded bar in Turkey.
Exactly. There you go. There you go.
Ah, wonderful. Do we have any other questions? Oh, yep, we do. Oh, okay. This one's for me. Got it. What are some of the top sellers at Desert Harvest in terms of sexual health? For us, we kind of try to provide a lot of different options here in terms of whether it's preventative, just aftercare. We've got the Aloe Rebalance, which is a feminine wash that you just want to use on your vulva area just to help keep things. You don't necessarily, we've been programmed to need that. And many OBGYNs will say, you just need water, we have been programmed to need that feeling of something, but this also is functional and helping to kind of just keep things balanced down there. The gelée is one option that is great vulvarly. If you have like any type of lichen sclerosis, lichen planus, just any type of irritation, you can refrigerate this one, get the cooling effect. You can put it in the fridge. the aloe glide, Relivium. There we go. Relivium is if you do want to get to the point of penetration. The best way to utilize the Relivium is to put it right on the vestibule, your opening to your vagina, right there. And what that does is kind of numb the area so that you can experience that penetrative sex. And the Relivium is all natural except for the 4% lidocaine. I do say if you've never tried a lidocaine product, definitely test yourself kind of on the crook of your elbow here for lidocaine sensitivity before putting it in another sensitive area. The Aloe Glide is 100% natural origin lubricant, sexual lubricant, and vaginal moisturizer, FDA cleared medical device. Is isoosmolar. So when I talk about osmolality, this is how the fluid flows in and out of the cells of your vaginal wall. Your epithelial cell layer is your protection. When you use a lubricant, so the ideal osmolality of a vagina is 290. And you want your lubricant, vaginal lubricant, to be anywhere plus or minus no more than 80 points. And this comes from the World Health Organization, and because they did a study on lubricants for sex workers in third world countries, and this is where we get this data from at this point. And what that means is we've got the fluid flowing in and out, but if you start introducing something chemical based, something that is not isoosmolar, what happens is your vaginal wall begins to dry out and literally falls out. So you've just lost your barrier of protection to STIs, bacteria. It is just a cascade effect. And so you want to be introducing things into your biome that are meant to be there. And obviously it's meant to also reset. You talked about lubricants and, feeling a little off with that, and you have to find the right one for yourself. Some lubricants, no matter what you have going on down there, no matter what you put down there, it might have a burning sensation, and that because your vaginal health might be off. So you might have micro tears, you might have a pH imbalance, you might have an osmolality imbalance, and that is what the Aloe Glide is meant for. The other one that we're mentioning here, this is going to go live, I think, next month. When we first did it, it kind of disappeared very quickly, unexpectedly. So we should have this in stock next week. This is for the anal biome. You have a completely different situation. So it also has its own epithelial cell layer of the anus. But if you introduce something that is meant for the vagina, something that is acidic, it is an alkaline biome. So you need something that is more alkaline. So up till this point with bum bums, the only thing that was really out there on the market that was alkaline enough and stayed alkaline would have been a silicone. Obviously chemical based, not ideal for us to put into our bodies. So that's why we developed bum bums, because it is pH balanced to stay and be alkaline, and specifically for the anal biome, and to stay slippery, because obviously there we're making absolutely no moisture. So if you're using it for sex, you're using it for pelvic floor physical therapy, anally, this is going to be the option for you. And then lastly, here we have the CBD, which is another way to potentially get past different types of barriers. The CBD that we utilize is CBD isolate combined with our aloe vera, which showed 25% more bioavailability or absorption into the body than any other CBD product out on the market because of the inclusion of the aloe vera. We did that study at the University of Colorado. And then we did a study at McGill University looking at different types of pain responses. Nerve injury pain had a 54% reduction after 24 hours. Bladder pain, 83% reduction after 24 hours. And currently we are developing women's health models, because we would really like to see what happens when we're talking about heavy menstrual bleeding, polycystic ovary syndrome, endometriosis, uterine fibroids, so many things that so many of us women experience, and how can we have comfortable sex with that? And so that is why we developed that. So, oh, another question. How did Desert Harvest and Tantra collide? I blew up your email. No.
Yeah. Yeah, you found me.
Yes, I told you. That whole like turkey story is authentically true. I really wanted to bring you to this audience. I really wanted to educate you. I wanted to educate myself further because, and that is why I will take your course, because I do want to be able to answer and inform on questions related to Tantra when I'm doing educational courses and speaking engagements. I want to be able to answer those questions, and I want to go to the master to be able to do that. So.
Yay, awesome. Well, it's an honor. And I will say about Tantra, for all of you listening, there's levels, right? So you can approach Tantra. It doesn't have to be this incredible like healing thing with all this stuff the way I teach it. That's what that's the way it was transmitted to me. So I like to I teach it at the top level, but you can really like scale it down. So really all it is about harmonizing and balancing your nervous system. Tantra can be broken down to methods specifically for rebalancing your nervous system. So like what you were describing, Heather, about your husband and you doing this breathing, as I shared before, it's all that was occurring there was both of your nervous systems were starting to balance and, and stabilize. And then you were sharing that connection. The thing to always keep in mind is that human beings, we are wired for connection, biologically wired for connection. So that means when we have the support and the environment to facilitate connection, the body does what it's designed to do. It's not rocket science. So many of the methods in Tantra are actually very simple. They're really about just coming to an inner state of peace and rest so that all of this magic can arise. That's our true capacity as human beings. Like the more I dive into Tantra, the more I really realize like humans are magic. We literally are created, like we were created, designed to live here in this environment, and we've survived for, tens of thousands of years. We're magic. And so when we are working in harmony with the way nature designed us, using organic lubes, breathing, connecting, understanding how our anatomy and physiology works, magic arises. Another piece that I want to make sure that I throw in here in relationship to sexuality and pleasure is the issue of engorgement of your internal erectile tissue. So some of you may know this, some may not, that we as women with vulvas and vaginas have more erectile tissue internally than a man has externally. But it can take us 20 to 45 minutes to reach full engorgement. Full engorgement. The average time of sexual penetration is 2 to 7 minutes, yo. So like sex is often over before we even have an erection. Yeah. So you want to wonder why there's pain. Well, imagine trying to have sex with a penis that isn't erect. It's a whole different story. So I know for me, I went 33 years of my life without having a fully erect clitoris.
Yeah. Equate it to like a man. What do we always say? I've got blue balls,
Yeah.
Imagine that, but for women, in a sense, that
exactly.
They haven't had that release. It hurts.
It hurts. Constriction. And also in relationship to the vagina even being ready to be penetrated. My mentor used to say that he believed that a woman needed to have at least 3 orgasms before she was even ready to be penetrated. Before he even put his penis inside a woman, she'd already had 3 or more orgasms, right? So that's a whole different, frame of mind in relationship to entering into penetrative intercourse. If you've had 20 minutes or longer of stimulation and rest and connection, and you're feeling all relaxed and your partner is saying all these wonderful words, your lovemaking is going to be a totally different experience than if you're just, kissing and then trying to put it in. I mean, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. I definitely believe wholeheartedly in that connection.
Yeah. So that's Tantra gives us, again, there's many layers to Tantra, but another layer is that it gives us a perspective and understanding of our physiology and our anatomy. How are our bodies designed to function for pleasure? We're wired for connection. We're also wired for pleasure, right?
We are. We forget pleasure sometimes in the daily chaos of life. So definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. This has been so informative. I can't wait to take your course. And, and I'm sure there's many others out there as well. Definitely, we're going to be posting this on all the social channels, YouTube. If more questions come that arise, go ahead and post them. We'll get them to Davey and get you those answers. So definitely.
Absolutely.
Thank you again so much, Davey. I appreciate it. This has been wonderful. Everybody enjoy the rest of May, Pelvic Health Month 2023, and have a wonderful weekend.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Peace.
Thank you.